just the way it goes. There we go. Right, now we're cooking. And all I need to do is move that here. If you can see the same scene that I'm looking at right now, you see this right here? I don't know if I'm allowed to show you this yet, but this is the cover for the book. I quite like the cover for the book. It's got a little blurb on the back, a little bit about the author, and it's got the cool kind of red blood moon or red sun, if you want. Both have lots of symbolic meaning. You've got the dilapidated church and churchyard, which is just enough detail. It's simple, it's striking as a cover. I think it's going to do unprecedented sales in Japan, but it's not overly pretentious, and that's what I want it to be. And as a book, I don't think it's overly pretentious. It's got a sort of pop religion vibe to it, and yet it has a scholarly after taste. I don't know why I'm describing it. Oh, yeah, I don't know why I'm describing it in the same language, just a wine connoisseur would. But we move, we move. So, religious trauma. Before I get into religious trauma, though, I'm going to have to stop this ridiculous music that's playing in my ears. Who's that? Smokestack Lightning, Howlin' Wolf, All Night Boogie. What kind of music do you guys listen to? What do you think about music? Do you think it's of the devil? Because there's people out there that do. I don't necessarily think music is of the devil. I think that's a ridiculous notion. Religious trauma, exploring the multifaceted impact of religious harm. So, the psychological and emotional impacts of religious trauma. You can have persistent fear and guilt instilled through doctrine or control. Didn't mean to skip. So, what kind of persistent fears? Well, you could have the persistent fear, or rather existential fear, of a God who hates you, or the idea that you're living above a perpetual trap door that just opens to hell at any point. Happy life. There's some persistent fear that comes through community policing. Some religious communities exert a lot of coercive control, and coercive control as utilitarian as that can be in terms of getting a result, it can also lead to resentments and cliques and just a lot of friction and psychological dampening, really just depressive in a way. And that's going to foster frustrations, internal and external. Um, the guilt is something that a lot of people can struggle with. They can constantly question themselves. They can even, some people can experience guilt where it's not appropriate. Some people cannot enjoy themselves because of a second guessing that will happen. Say, for example, if they go out and party, even if they've done nothing wrong, the next day they might think, oh goodness, what if I did? Right? There's a lot of guilt that can pathologize in the mind. And, you know, there's certain doctrines and certain means of control that certainly exacerbate these things, you know. There's obsessive compulsive traits. I used to suffer with something called pure O, and for me that took the form of blasphemous thoughts, so that whenever I would close my eyes in prayer, my mind would jump to a blasphemous thought, usually insulting the mother of Jesus. And so I would assume that God hates me because I had this reflexive negative thought whenever I went to pray. And that's produced by anxiety. The anxious mind will produce the question, what if? And that what if escalates in calamity to the worst possible outcome or the worst possible thing. So for me, the worst possible thing I could ever think to do would be to insult what I believed to be back then was God's mum, right? And I don't know where that came from because I wasn't a malicious child. I was a very innocent and sweet child. I didn't have nasty thoughts. But this thought just would come into my mind like a demonic oppression. And it used to cause me so much upset. And because I believed God hated and God judged, I never found peace until I was in my 20s. And that started when I was 8 years old. I was just a baby. And then I wasn't until I was 20 or 22 where I realized, wait, if God is real, then God knows my heart, God knows my mind, and God knows I hate this. Gone. That disappeared in an instant. A decade long, over a decade of obsessive, fear based thinking disappeared with a single moment of faith and belief and purity from myself, from within, a genuine engagement with God, just on a rational level. You know, we don't even have to put it up high, just that rational engagement from on a personal, deep level and an emotional one too. And it just completely cleansed it. And yeah, scrupulosity, just being that over scrupulous in your dealings, often going over things. And then you've got suppression or fragmentation of identity, difficulty expressing your true self, right? And there's obviously different extremes where that can be, but it might be that there's a profession that you're not allowed to go into because of your religious inclination or expectations. It might be that you have particular traits in your personality where you might want to be a fighter, you might want to go into the UFC, but your parents don't believe in violence, or you might want to be an artist, but that's seen as too wishy washy and not grounded enough. And that could come from a religious sentiment about being a good steward or whatever. You might think of better examples of these things, but there's so much more you could say about the emotional and psychological toll that these things can take. Very simple and good to see in the chat. Whoa, I was just listening to house music and thinking about this. I saw you were live, so jumped over here instead. Oh well, is this your new book cover? Swoonworthy? Yeah, yeah, no, it is. It's looking pretty good. And which rune is it? I don't think it is a particular rune. I think it's just an archetypical rune. But just to be fancy, I'll say it's Arbroath. It's Arbroath Abbey, or whatever it was, where the Declaration of Independence of America was genetically founded based on the Declaration of Arbroath here in Scotland, or so say some people who study the Declaration, such as Nick Cage. Um, Many a Scottish person signed the Declaration of Arbroath. In fact, there's a minister from the town over called John Weatherspoon. He used to minister here in Ayrshire, where I'm from, just a mile up the road. He signed the Declaration. So, yeah, lots you can say about the emotional and psychological impact. Truly haunting. Okay, developmental consequences, inhibited critical thinking and independent reasoning. Um, Now, some traditions might be quite litigious in how they operate, and so that might give you a certain agility of mind. But there are indeed institutions and familial settings where critical thinking is hindered, particularly in households that are quite stoically led. The man of the house has the final word. The children will sit quietly and they will not speak out of turn. Now, I understand the sort of macho bravado of that. However, if you don't let your children argue, if you don't let your children mouth off, not ridiculously, but if you don't let your children speak, then it limits their mental cognition because they don't get to practice having an argument. They don't get to practice winning an argument. Now, that's not to say as an adult, you let your children run over you. I'm not saying that. All I'm saying is if you've got a child and it's got a brother or sister or a cousin or a friend, you know, have them at the table and have them talk. And you can mediate and you can facilitate, but don't tell them to shut up. Don't do that, because if you shut up the kids, then they will be taken advantage of every way you can, and in fact every way you cannot think of in life. You are tying their hands behind their backs and sending them out among wolves. So don't do that to your children. Let them fight, let them talk, Let them debate and discuss at the table, right? Because you will limit their social skills, you will limit their ability to think through ideas. You cannot tell the kids to shut up. Don't do that. By all means, correct them. By all means, monitor how they're going through their emotions. If they're getting too fiery, bring it back. Bring it back. We shouldn't be getting so upset with kids that we're getting to that point where, they're getting too out of control. If they're still under 10 years old, you should have that locked down, right? It shouldn't get crazy. You shouldn't have to throw hands at your kids. You know what I'm saying? So I'm not telling people how to raise their children because that's not fair for me to do that. I don't have any children, but I've taught in primary school. I've taught over, I don't know, hundreds of children. And I don't know, I've never had to fight one. Otherwise, I'd be arrested. Um, okay. Delayed development of autonomy and personal boundaries. Yeah, that's true as well. Again, it's the same point. It's the same point about personal boundaries. That's a lesson I'm still learning. Um, I think my boundaries are too porous. I think I let people um, dictate too much of my identity instead of asserting myself. And indeed, there's still dysfunction within me where I might assert the wrong thing at times. So I'm mindful. Stunted emotional maturation due to rigid moral structures. Yes, I think I could say I've suffered with that, where, and I'm not quite sure, you guys can maybe discuss this point yourselves or discuss it in the chat, but that idea that perhaps your emotional maturity doesn't come into full blossom because it might not come up against the rough textures that are experienced in the secular world. An overly religious household might impose commandments that you don't touch, like you don't touch them. They don't buffer you. They don't. You don't feel them on your person, working you into a streamlined individual. Those moral structures of the church might be like so vast that you never really get to come up against them. They don't shape you, is what I'm trying to say. You don't conform to them because they don't mean anything to you as a child growing up. They just don't touch you, And it's like, well, what does that mean? You know what I mean? Then you're not engaging. There's no traction, so you don't really grow where there's no traction. There's nothing to reverse. There's no travel if there's no traction. So you're just kind of floating through these incomprehensible concepts, and it takes a lot to ground them. You really, you ground your morality through lived experience. But if you're sheltered from those experience, guided by these big floaty, rigid moral axioms or maxims, then yeah, that's going to be quite tricky for a young adult to navigate. At least that's what I think. Frank, thank you for saying that, Frank, about the book. I want you to have my book. In fact, I want the book to be significant. I think it has the potential to be a beautiful, beautiful book. I've spent a lot of time writing it in such a way that this book could go into anybody's hands and it's not going to offend them. Like you could take the most ardent, dyed in the wool anti preterist, give them my book, and they would thank you for it because it's not oppressive. The tone, I've actually set the tone, like there's a contract almost at the front about the tone of the book. It's so carefully woven and I believe powerfully written that it's gonna be digestible to anyone who picks it up. Anyone who picks up, even people who just like good stories, right? Because it's a story at the same time as it is as much an examination of full preterism. So I like that. Thank you, Frank. And Frank, you've got the same surname as one of the main main guys in the full preterist movement, Don Preston. Lady says, "Yeah, me too. Thank you, Lady Cymbeline. Yeah, I'm looking forward to getting it out. Probably not too long. I think within a month. Um, Still worried about my salvation. Isaiah 64 to 66 has some crazy stuff. Yeah, listen, that crazy stuff is grounded in something much like the moral structures that might send us for a loop because we're not used to them. It's just we're so symbolically illiterate that when we come up against the kinds of things you read in Isaiah 64 to 66, you can't touch them. We don't get to connect with that because that society's dead. It doesn't exist anymore. That society has gone, and all that we have is the stuff of nightmares, right? All we have is this Salvador Dali painting of strange things. And it's like, what the? It's really difficult to connect with what the text is saying. So maybe later on we could have a little gander at that, Frank. Absolutely. Let's talk about organizational harm. They've only got a couple of more pages. I think we've got 9 pages on this. Organizational harm can take the form of enforced submission to hierarchical power structures. So I was seriously considering joining the Church of Latter-day Saints, not because I believed in their doctrines and not cynically either, like, oh, I don't believe in this, but I'm going to join. Haha. It was more the case of they were a beautiful. It was a beautiful church in terms of the people who comprised it. However, when the organizational materials produced themselves, it looked like you had to tie yourself into a 10% tithe. And it's not that I'm against that. I think that might be a good idea in some churches. I didn't have the means to do that at the time, and that was a bit. It put me off a little bit. Um, Not that that's the biggest form of submission. There's also the idea that you might not get to have a democratic voice, which isn't nice. You know, in America, you have a saying: taxation, no taxation without representation. Uh, and I don't know if you would get the representation that you necessarily wanted. Not saying that that is a criticism of the LDS Church, by the way. That's not what I'm doing. But certain churches, you might feel that way. I certainly remember that I was put on a council to find the next minister of my local church. And then some other reverend told us we were not going to get a say. Like one of the people in the group said, "Oh, we're looking for like a young, enthusiastic minister." And this older minister said, "Well, I'm going to make sure that doesn't happen," because he was afraid that it might bring in a less conservative voice, and he didn't want to give any power to such a voice, which is it's weird. It was weird, because I don't think that's what she meant by that. I don't think she meant, oh, let's turn the church into a LGBT plus thing. I don't think that's what she meant, but that's how he took it. Conditional status and belonging based on obedience or spiritual rank. Again, not necessarily a negative thing to have a certain structure, hierarchy, and expectation within a church or any organization for that matter. Like if you started a company and all your employees were disobedient and didn't know their place, then your company's not going to work, is it? However, the idea that your spiritual growth might be tied to something that suffers from bureaucratic inertia, that could be seen as particularly depressing. That there's this sort of organizational lag when you might be hungry, when you might feel a dynamic relationship with God, but the relationship you feel with God isn't compatible within the organization, and that perhaps you might feel that God's calling you to act out more confidently and to assume more authority, but then you come across a council of people who tell you no. And they tell you no, and it might come from a rather arbitrary place. They just might not like you, in which case you're going to suffer some anguish and frustration. Then you have disempowerment through lack of voice in religious governance, which is much the same point. Then we have familial and social consequences, all right? Strained or broken family bonds over differing beliefs. This is something that I know people have experienced within religion. Here in Scotland, it's not uncommon to hear this from people who have family in the Jehovah's Witness Church. The Jehovah's Witnesses will probably not enjoy my book. The Jehovah's Witnesses are basically a doomsday cult, or so I hear. Um, there's things that I do agree with them on. I think they've got some understandings that I'm compatible with. But regarding eschatology, no, no, we are completely at odds. And they practice that shunning, exiling, ostracization, loss of social capital when leaving or questioning faith. Yeah, that social capital is just your capacity to exercise autonomy and have access to certain things. Like you can lose access to work, you can lose access to relationships, you can lose access and status because you have depleted your social capital by leaving the church, and they might threaten you with that. Fear of community shunning or exile from lifelong networks. You know, the human beings are very social. You know, we enjoy socializing, we like people, and you know, the idea that a church would threaten you with that based on some kind of differing belief, instead of having a spirit of exploration and good faith towards such endeavours where they are orientated by a pull towards truth. If they can't do that in good faith, well, you know, that causes some real struggle and strain. And it's a shame. It's a shame to experience that, right? There we go. Lady says, stepped out for a microwave curry. I do like a microwave curry. A lot of these consequences show up with physical symptoms in the body. That's very profound. Very profound. Um, you know, people will say, you know, you can't speak about psychology without speaking about physiology. And I think the two are related, you know, mental health and physical health. Very much one and the same. I had a strange encounter with a Jehovah's Witness who is a neighbour to me too. I wished her a happy Mother's Day last Sunday and she said thanks. I asked her how she would spend it and she says, I don't acknowledge it because of my faith, but I'll be spending the day with my daughters. It took me many hours to keep understanding the delineation. Yeah, the Jehovah's Witnesses have made a doctrine out of not celebrating birthdays and holidays and Christmas, etc., which is, again, it's something taken too far because I am personally not someone who makes much of a fuss out of particular days like birthdays and stuff like that. I do try to make an effort for other people, but I don't feel it. I don't feel the compulsion. And that doesn't come from a bad place. It's just, you know, where Paul says that we should pray without ceasing. Well, that's sort of like me, like every day is that, you know what I mean? But that could be seen as dismissive and reductive. I think it's good to have days of celebrations and feasts and happiness, right? Anything that can bring us together with a spirit of appreciation, joy, and laughter, that is to be endorsed. So the Jehovah's Witnesses have went too far, if you ask me. They've went too far there. Yes. Physical impacts. Look at that. You presaged it, Lady Cymbeline. So this takes it to the next level, though. Medical neglect due to prayer-based or anti-scientific healing benefits. So we might actually still be on the Jehovah's Witnesses here who don't believe in blood transfusion. Now, there's an interesting thing that happened here because of the Jehovah's Witnesses not desiring blood transfusion, it put pressure on medical, um, just the medical industry to produce technology that could have the health benefits of a blood transfusion without actually being a blood transfusion. Now, I don't understand this completely, but I don't like. I literally can't explain to you. It doesn't sound real. It sounds like I've got the details wrong because how can you do a blood transfusion without transfusing blood? But I do believe they did come up with a solution. Now that is actually quite cool that they were able to have create what is effectively a redundancy so that if a blood transfusion can't happen, they can do this other thing instead, which has the same effect. Again, I don't understand that. It sounds like I've got it wrong because what I'm suggesting there just sounds entirely implausible. Like I can't just, from a place of ignorance, improvise what that would be. But I do believe that's true. In fact, it would only take me a couple of seconds to verify that for you there. So let me fact check for you. Did medicine come up with another way to do blood transfer for the sake of Jehovah's Witnesses? A doobie doobie doo. I do believe they did. So did medicine come up with another way to do blood transfusions for the sake of Jehovah's Witnesses? And the answer is yes. I mean, my computer's working quite slow, so the answer is ye. The S hasn't. Here we go. Medicine has developed bloodless alternatives and blood conservation strategies to accommodate Jehovah's Witnesses who refuse blood transfusions due to religious beliefs. It's called erythropoietin or EPO therapy, and it stimulates the production of red blood cells, often given before surgery to increase hemoglobin levels, etc., etc. We don't need to get into medical science here. That I'm not that kind of YouTube channel. But how cool that that was a thing. But also how unfortunate that that pressure was applied in the first place, considering we already had a relatively elegant solution. Corporal punishment or abuse justified through scripture. Yeah. Now, people will say that the schools were better or better controlled when there was corporal punishment in them. I am not sure about that. I think there's ways to instill um, discipline that don't involve corporal punishment. In fact, there's a popular school in England that's capable of this, and I forget what they're called, but you'll sometimes see her. She's been interviewed by like Jordan Peterson. She's got big curly hair. It's like a person's name or something. I'll give you the name of it now. Strict school in England, famous head teacher. Let's see if I can find that for you guys, even though you don't need to know, but it's good to have an example. Catherine Burbalsing. So her name's Catherine Burbalsing, and she's head of Michaela Community School in Wembley, West London. And she has a zero tolerance, and she demands discipline. And everyone's treated the same, right? Everybody's treated the same. Doesn't matter what your culture is, what your background is. Everyone is the same treatment, and everyone's expected to act a certain way. And so no one needs to get hurt. Nobody has to be injured. You show up, you do what's right, or you're gone. Bye bye. And it works great. And it's not a rich place; it's a poor place, and everybody gets really good grades. And yeah, it's definitely demonstrating how the wishy-washy stuff um, doesn't really work. You know, giving children all the rights in the world and zero responsibility doesn't work. We've tried that now. it ain't working out because kids don't want it. The kids want to have fun, right? And there's that, you can make education fun, but at the same time, you need structure and discipline, and they need to respect authority. So, corporal punishment, don't believe in it, but um, you can do it without it. So, Michaela Community School proves that. Harmful dietary or fasting practices enforced by doctrine. Yep. Um, you might find that there's harmful dietary practices. I've never really faced that. I'm trying to imagine what that might be. I know that Catholics tend to eat fish on a Friday. Um, maybe it's a Hindu thing, like the Rajasic diets or the something like that. Might not agree with you, or the fasting in Ramadan might be quite difficult for some people, especially if you've got blood sugar issues. Um, and of course, there's other physical impacts too that we haven't talked about because they're too dark, such as the scandal in the Catholic Church with predator priests and you know religious leaders who abuse their authority to gratify themselves using the innocent, which is a grievous sin. I was talking to a friend today, and that came up because we're talking about crime and punishment and the death penalty coming back into the United Kingdom. Now, we're not bringing the death penalty back yet, but it's a national discussion. And also, an ex client that we used to work with. So, we had clients come into our rehab, and one of the clients is in the newspapers because he's been beating his girlfriends. And I was terribly disappointed. And my former colleague was just thinking, I hate this guy. If I could, I would smash him. And I thought, well, what do you do? Because I believe in redemption. And I said there should be a halfway village for this guy. Clearly, he's not capable of a relationship. He's hurting people that are less powerful than him. He can't be in society. He should be in like a halfway village. And I know filling a village with people that are dysfunctional might sound like a terrible idea, but if you use the Michaela School principles and just police it with military, and generally these people, because this was a guy that came into the rehab, he was always capable of doing these things, entirely personable. You know, I, I wasn't afraid of him, and it's unfortunate that he has taken it upon himself to become an abusive person. But I do believe he could be saved because he did tell me he started to pray a little bit, and he said it kind of gave him a wee bit of hope. So maybe there's something that can be worked with there. But then I'm thinking about these people who prey on children, and I know there's a lot of people that like just throw them into a wood chipper, and I think to myself, well, I don't know. There's something about my belief in God that would, preclude the use of a wood chipper. I think there has to be something between the wood chipper and I don't know. But then the idea came up for a village, and then my friend told me they watched a documentary by Louis Thoreau or something like that, and in Florida, there's a village. I think it's called Miracle Village, and it's operated by Matthew 25 Ministries, which I found incredible. I was like, really? I would have thought this was a government thing, but I'm sure the government works in tandem with this ministry. And it's a village that's been filled with abusive pedophiles. I mean, there's a place if you want to drop a nuclear bomb. No, I don't think we should drop nuclear bomb on it. But I don't know. I haven't looked into it, but it did look like there was some positives there. Like they had been, I just don't know what to do with such a person. I want to believe that neuroscience will get to a place where we can not electroshock therapy, but something like that we can just rewire the brain and take that and restructure that part that's causing that kind of behavior. Um, and people talk about electroshock therapy being really good for depression and bipolar disorder. and things like that. You know, lots of people think it's a barbaric procedure, but not really. They've modernized it to a great degree. I don't think it's an exact um, meticulous thing. I think you're probably doing more global damage than you would want to. Although I think they can really refine it today. But again, I don't think that's the solution to people who have wayward appetites, let's call it, because I don't even like to refer to it straight up. Um, let's see. My thoughts. What I mean, it isn't making an idol of a holiday you share it with family. She was still doing the activity, but made it to the point it's not for holding the holiday itself. Yeah, that's it. This is so helpful, Wells. Do you think there is any merit in the chakras? I often hear about the throat chakra and thyroid problems, and the only way to fix it is to find and work on your true voice. How do you think AI will change medicine? Um, the chakras. Well, well, personally speaking, I'm not dismissive of that. I think that perhaps people just try to find language to make reference to things that are difficult to comprehend. And the idea that the body has particular zones of particular energies that relate to parts of the body, um, it could be true. There could be. I mean, when I say it could be true, what does that mean? I mean, in religion, we speak of the body and we speak of, you know, particular parts of the body having particular uses. And I don't mean to conflate because I know that there's very strict conservative Christians who will say, "Oh, I see you're a slippery slope. You're trying to get in with the Vedas, etc., into that satanic Hinduism yogi shit." It's like no. Um, I just think that there is there is wisdom in other religions. Can we say that? Is that okay? Will you excuse me? There is wisdom in other religions, and I would be cautious, right? Because obviously, I still have that Presbyterian character to me, that Protestant Christian conservatism is part of who I am, and I wrestle with that. And I'm suspicious of other traditions. It's a vestigial suspicion. It's not a full chested, I am suspicious. It's a vestigial suspicion of anything other. Just a sheer xenophobic Christian approach. Now, so I think I would advise everyone today embrace the chakras. That's what I'm saying. No, but I did know someone who did work, energy work. They did Reiki, and I think it's just a metaphor. That's my ultimate analysis on it. It's just a nice metaphor to work and to bring focus into certain parts of the body. Like if I want to focus on my heart chakra, and that makes me think about love and tenderness and focusing on breath, focusing on breath. Inhale the light, inhale the goodness, exhale any negativity. Then there's nothing wrong with that. There is nothing wrong with that. Don't try to pathologize something that's benign and ordinary, is what I would say. And I think AI will certainly have lots of positive implications for medicine. I think AI will be able to formulate more quickly solutions to problems. I think AI will be able to use surgical tools with greater precision. The AI might be able to, how you get those little diabetes monitoring strips. So you use a piece of your blood and you put it on the strip, and then it'll tell your blood sugar levels. Well, I think AI will be able to get a read on your biochemical markers, like you just sit down and you put some cords on your chest and stuff, or you put a little device that just kind of touches into your skin and takes a live feed of your different neurotransmitters and whatever else. And it can judge how stressed you are, and it can judge and perhaps anticipate if a surgery's worked or if it hasn't based on the readings it's getting, and then it can come up with solutions. I think, yeah, I think AI will basically make medicine incredibly streamlined and incredibly sensitive to the point the problem will be saying enough's enough. You know how with facial surgery, people keep putting fillers in, like I want my cheeks to stick out here and this and that, the next thing, and I want my lips to come all the way out to here. I think the problem in medicine will be that we'll become too healthy. We'll become so healthy that it will have psychological effects that are negative and it become obsessive, and that'll be the next thing. So, provided that we don't kill each other in the meantime. You know, there's a lot of issues in society just now. There's a lot of potential for war, and there's the whole electromagnetic polar shift thing that's 200,000 years overdue, and we've had a weakening of the magnetosphere by 10 to 15% over the last 30 years, and maybe there's a polar flip that might happen. I don't think it will. Honestly, like I do watch Suspicious Observers to follow the space weather phenomenon and the geomagnetic uh, energies of the Earth. But basically, what would happen in that scenario is if the North Pole and the South Pole were to flip, which is what they kind of do every so often. So 42,000 years ago, they semi flipped and then flipped back over the course of like 1,000 years. And what that does is it reduces the Earth's shield against solar radiation. So it would fry all the electric uh, infrastructure and essentially throw us back into the Stone Age, um, depending on how well insulated our grids are. And of course, we could quickly try to resolve that matter, or we could try and engineer uh, more robust grids. And we can do that. We can shield our infrastructure against solar magnetic radiation, but we're not doing that, even though that's probably the single biggest risk to society. We have not done it in any measurable degree. Um, but I wouldn't worry about it because I just don't think it's going to happen. If it does, I don't think it'll be for another 200 years. We'll see. We'll see. Um, yeah, physical impacts. We're smashing this one. Um, let's see here. Oh yeah, Suspicious Observers. Oh, there's a lot of drama on Suspicious Observers. Like the guy's wife left him and stuff, and he just had like a drunken live stream. I don't know if he was drunk anyway. I just been emotionally uh, unstable, which I would be too if my relationship fell apart. But it sounds like he very much loved his wife, but they just grew apart and became very different. And then she moved on and found a new guy. And then the new guy was living, they bought a big ranch. And then the new guy moved into the ranch, but the ranch is supposed to be for subscribers to come and visit as well. And I think he was getting annoyed that this new guy had taken over or taken a place in the ranch. And he's like, dude, this is built off my back. Nobody knows who you are, my ex-wife. Nobody knows who you are. This is my channel. This is my work. And now you've got a guy living off the fruit of my labor. And I get that. I think everybody understands that. And it's like, yeah, that does seem unfair. So yeah, that's unfortunate. That's unfortunate. But what are you going to do? You know, we need to start a ranch because Kent Hovind, if you know who Kent Hovind is, he does the Young Earth Creation Ministry. He's got a ranch, right? So Suspicious Observers has a ranch. Kent Hovind has a ranch. Hickok45 has a ranch. If there's any subscribers to this channel who knows who Hickok45 is, I'll be very surprised. I've got a very eclectic taste in YouTube channels. Okay, financial exploitation. So manipulation through prosperity gospel or spiritualized wealth doctrines. Yeah, Joel Osteen, Kenneth Copeland, these people who want to take your money so they can buy a private jet. I think that that's despicable. I don't think that kind of accumulation of wealth via ministry is entirely appropriate. It could be, I'm not saying it can't be, it could be if they used it judiciously and with discernment. Like you could amass as much cash as you wanted. And you know what? I have to believe that Joel Osteen and Kenneth Copeland and people like that genuinely do good things with the money. I have to believe it. Surely they have to. Right? They might be a bit greedy and it might take a wee bit too much for themselves. But I don't understand how they could possibly exist and not have at least one or two programs. Right? Surely they have one or two programs. Right? Let me just fact check live here. Does Kenneth Copeland actually give to charitable endeavors? He must. He must. If the answer is just no, then I'm like Americans. I'm downgrading you. Downgrading you. All right. Like the answer is yes. Right. So Kenneth Copeland Ministries claims to contribute to charitable endeavours, both directly and through partnerships. According to the official materials and public statements, they offer several initiatives, including disaster relief efforts, military and prison outreach, providing free ministry materials to service members and inmates, global missions in partnership with other ministries to support international evangelism and humanitarian aid, and the feeding programs and clothing donation through partner churches and organisations. That said, critics often argue that these charitable works are overshadowed by Copeland's personal wealth and the ministry's lavish expenditures, such as private jets, large estates. It's got tax exempt religious status, so financial transparency isn't required. So while Copeland does give, the scope, efficiency, and motivations of those contributions are often subject to scrutiny. Well, aye, it does feel a wee bit dodgy, doesn't it? So guilt-induced giving beyond one's means. Yeah, I don't like that. To me, that's just like the Indian scammers that we get here in the UK. I'm not sure if you get that in America as well, but we often get some India-based scamming. And I don't see that. That's not when I say Indian. That's not a moral statement. I'm not saying, oh, you know how those Indians are. How many Indians are there? Right? What's the population of India? Because I think it's close to a billion. Is it over a billion? 1.4 billion, right? So imagine that the population of India is almost what 10% of the whole world. So it's more than 10%, and it's like 15% or something of the whole world. So how many psychopaths are in India? So many psychopaths, so many sociopaths, just by sheer statistical power. And so that's not a moral condemnation, right? It just so happens that there's a industry for these sociopaths to benefit from in India. So is there cultural issues there as well that might need to be addressed? Perhaps, but there's criminality in every country. But it just so happens that the Indians are the most proficient at using scams to try and get people to give their give beyond their means. and I'm very tempted to do an Indian accent, but I'm not going to because Hank Azaria didn't do one. He stopped voicing Apu, so it's probably illegal for me to do a Indian accent. So I'm not going to do it. Oh, it'd be so good though. I'm so good at it, but I'm not gonna. I'm not going to. No, I'm not. Fear of financial curses or punishments for not tithing. Yeah, where would that come from? I feel like that's coming out of like I can hear an African pastor. I can hear a guy from Nigeria saying that. Um, and I've got a great Nigerian accent as well, man. Got a great Nigerian accent, but I'm not gonna bust it out. I'm not gonna bust it out tonight. Um, I feel like I should. I feel like I'm really good at it, but I'm not gonna. I'm not going to. I worked with a couple of Nigerian guys recently. Really lovely people, but I can, that there's a very famous. I think it's a Nigerian guy. The accent sounds that way. Yes, like why are you gay? Like very conservative, very, you know. So yeah, financial curses. Don't really hear about that so much in the United Kingdom, but it is something I can hear somebody saying that, punishments for not tithing. Political and national influences. There's something there. Um, yeah. Let's see. Lady Simpling says, I get that upset, but he was also always so snarky with his own community, even the well meaning ones. It turned me off for quite some time. We do need a ranch. West Virginia, land is cheap, guitars around the campfire, never tiring of it. West Virginia. Yeah, does sound good, doesn't it? There's something like, what's that band? Is it Kansas? That'd be so weird if the band was called Kansas. I don't think it is. Who sang West Virginia? West Virginia song by. It's something with a C. It's got a C in it, right? Almost heaven. West Virginia. Come on, take me home country. John Denver, which is Kansas, right? I knew it was Denver, right? Denver is in Kansas. I'm having a stroke. Yeah, Kansas did dust in the wind. I think. Yeah, that's what I was thinking. I was thinking of those dusty roads in West Virginia. Okay, political and national influences. All right, limited employment due to religious discrimination or pressure. Um, where might you experience that? Well, there was the longest time where Catholics need not apply and stuff like that would be up, sectarianism can play a role. There might be pressure applied to you to move in a certain direction due to your religious convictions. Conflicted national identity when religion and patriotism are conflated. There's a debate in America about Christian nationalism and the certain flavors that can take. There's a Buchananism. Some political commentator guy, was his name Buchanan? I forget his first name. And he espoused certain Christian values. That was seen as the more tame mainstream position. There's also a more radical Christian nationalism, apparently. I haven't seen it. Maybe that'd be like the Westboro Baptist Church or something. There's Islam. There's a lot of conflation in Islam with nationalism, and and not really Israel. I wouldn't say Israel pushes itself as a religious state. I think it's a godless state by all means, with a very limited Jewish expression. I mean, I say that as if with confidence. Let's see. What percentage of Israelis are religious? As in practitioners. I don't think it's that high. I think a lot of Jewish people are extremely secular, much like European people. Let's see. I'm going to guess 20% max. 20% max. It's actually giving me facts about birds for some reason. Didn't ask that. I asked about the religious in Israel. Actual practicing Jews. I think it's something like 1 in 3% of Europeans go to church, and it's something like 20% of Americans go to church. Where did I hear that? I heard that very recently. So it says here 43% of Israeli Jews are secular, 22 identifies tradition but not religious, 13 are tradition and religious, 11 identifies religious, and 10 identify as ultra-Orthodox. So yeah, I'd say it's about 34%, which is actually a little higher than I thought it would be. And that includes the traditional and religious, the religious and the ultra-Orthodox. So that's a little higher than I would have actually expected. So roughly 20 to 35%. So I guess I did say 20, so I wasn't too far off. But the higher margin, 35, surprises me. Rigid political alignment enforced by religious authority. Certainly we can see some expressions of that. Sometimes it just goes together. Like those with traits that incline them towards religion may also have a certain reverence for traditionalism, which obviously is very compatible with conservatism as a perspective. The idea that you want to conserve what you have. You know, and some people say it's the aspiration of a liberal to be a conservative because you want things to be so progressive and to have progressed so far as a liberal or left winger that you then want to conserve those things, right? So it's only natural that if you live your life as a left wing liberal person and you start to accumulate success, that you'll then turn into a conservative because you'll notice the things that have gotten better and you'll seek to preserve them. And oftentimes that's seen as, well, it might be cynically perceived as self-serving, you know, that you have advanced your manifesto and that's enough for you. But I don't think that's necessarily the case. I think that, you know, there's only finite things we can do in terms of establishing our comfort. And then you might go too far, right? We have to be aware that there's always the potential to go too far. And that concludes that part of that segment. So, where are we? Yeah, Denver is famously in West Virginia. No, it's in Colorado. I think I would struggle to survive in Colorado. I think the altitude would destroy me. So let's see. They've got a little video here now, and I'm going to turn up the desktop volume. Hopefully it's not too loud for y'all, because I'm about to press play on this video. Let's see what it has to say.
Comments of a recent poll on religion. Many of you shared that you've had bad experiences with religion and that it has traumatized you. Religious trauma is a topic that can receive wildly different reactions. Some might say it's made up and completely impossible, while others knew what we meant as soon as they heard the term religious trauma. We're dealing with a somewhat sensitive topic again, so please be mindful that if this isn't your experience, maybe someone else's. We are strictly looking at what the research tells us about religious trauma. We just ask you to keep an open mind and stay respectful as we explore a type of trauma that isn't spoken about often enough. We aim to do the same. The goal of this video isn't to make religion look bad. We're looking at this from a purely academic and empathetic perspective. So, let's get into it. The big question we're asking in this video is whether religious trauma is real. The opinion of both psychologists and religious scholars is that religious trauma is real. The trauma largely seems to stem from the prevalence of shame and guilt in some religious circles. Because of this, It's a unique problem that can be addressed from both a psychological and theological point of view. When we talk about shame and guilt when it comes to religion, we're talking about things like feeling bad constantly for any little thing. Not praying enough or saying a little white lie can make you feel terrible, but in the way a conscience regularly would. The guilt is directly tied to religious morality and the fear of hell. It is a battle of extremes. An extremely small action or even thought has an extremely large toll on your mental health. If you have religious trauma, you might think that this is how everyone deals with their guilt. For the vast majority of religious people, it isn't. Trauma can happen when you face abuse. This can happen in your religious experience as well. The term for this type of trauma is spiritual abuse. This happens when someone uses your religion or spirituality against you to manipulate you, exploit, or deceive you. This can happen if someone misuses scripture to control you or guilt trip you. If you faced other kinds of abuse from someone with religious authority, this could also cause religious trauma. You may start to resent religion. The initial sting of the trauma may die down over time, but your opinion of religion is less likely to change if the trauma isn't addressed. Not everyone experiences religious trauma, so you may feel like an outsider, as though you know something about religion that others don't. In reality, everyone has a different experience with religion. This is why some insist that their religion, or all religions, are positive, whereas those who have left their religion can insist that all religions are negative. It all comes down to your experience. Ironically, after most other traumatic events, if religion played no part in the trauma, religion can help people cope with their trauma and heal. Spiritual abuse from religious trauma put you in a difficult spot where not only do you feel betrayed, ostracized, and used, but you can't rely on religion to help you. This can make you feel separated from your family and community if they still practice the religion. All of this together might make you feel very, very alone. If religious trauma exists, how do we find our way out of it? The best thing to do with any type of trauma is to speak to a professional about it. Some people find their way back to religion, while others do not. Your situation is unique to you, but you're not alone. Religious trauma can give you a great sense of uncertainty and insecurity. To treat religious trauma, the first step would be to reestablish a sense of self-agency and be aware of power dynamics, while avoiding situations where you feel a lack of choice or agency. Of course, that is a general idea of what might help. Each person is different. You may want to maintain your beliefs and find a healthier way to celebrate, or you may need help coping with things like religious OCD. There is such a thing as religious trauma. If you think you have experienced religious trauma, remember that you're not alone in this. No matter where your religious experience has taken you, there are many people who can relate to you. Let us know in the comments if any of this sounds familiar to you. Remember, everyone has their own experience and perspective, so be respectful. If this video gave you some perspective or taught you something new, please leave a like. Subscribe to Psych2Go for more videos like this. Thanks for learning with us.
My friends laughed at me for buying.
All right, well, that just kind of summarizes everything we've been talking about. Does it really add to the conversation? I know there's so much you could break down in talking about that stuff, but yeah, designing materials for addressing religious trauma, I think, are important. As I say, it is going to be a factor in all of this, so it's only right that that's approached in a sensitive and serious